Today we are standing at the edge of one of the most consequential financial turning points in modern history. A shift that has been quietly building for years is now breaking into the open, and it's coming from a place few expected: Japan. For decades, Japan has been the invisible stabilizer of the global financial system, the silent giant buying more U.S. government debt than any other nation on Earth. Its actions kept American borrowing cheap, markets calm, and global liquidity abundant. It was the anchor everyone assumed would always hold. But now that anchor is slipping. Japan's latest financial moves are sending shockwaves across global markets. Wall Street is rattled. Currency traders are on edge. Policymakers in Washington are suddenly asking a question they never thought they'd face. What happens when America's biggest foreign creditor begins to step back? Because that is exactly what's happening. Japan, the world's largest holder of U.S. Treasuries, is no longer sustaining America's appetite for cheap debt. Not because it wants to make a geopolitical statement. Not because it's trying to disrupt global markets. But because it can't afford not to act anymore. Behind Japan's decisions lies a convergence of structural pressures that have been building silently. A surge in domestic bond yields, a collapsing currency that must be defended at any cost, and a historic internal debt burden that is finally demanding payment. Individually, each of these forces would be destabilizing. Together, they mark the end of a financial era that lasted more than 40 years. This is not a temporary market fluctuation. This is not speculation. This is a structural reordering of global finance, and its consequences will reshape borrowing costs, market stability, and the balance of financial power for years to come. And today we're going to break down exactly why it's happening, and what comes next. To understand the scale of this shift, we need to break down the forces pushing Japan into a corner. Forces so powerful and structural that even a nation as financially disciplined as Japan can no longer ignore them. Because Japan isn't simply choosing to reduce its exposure to U.S. debt. It is being pushed into it by three unavoidable dynamics that are reshaping its domestic economy. Driver 1, the reversal of the yen carry trade. For decades, one of the most profitable global money machines was built on a simple idea. Borrow in Japan, invest in America. Japan kept interest rates near zero. The U.S. offered much higher yields. The difference in rates, sometimes 5 times higher, fueled billions of dollars in Japanese purchases of U.S. Treasuries. This trade was stable, predictable, and immensely lucrative. Until now. Japan's domestic bond yields have surged to their highest levels in decades. Suddenly, Japanese investors, from pension giants to life insurers, have a powerful reason to bring their money home. Higher yields at home mean less incentive to seek returns abroad. This is why Japan has sold tens of billions of U.S. Treasuries in just a short period. The carry trade is unwinding. And when a pillar that has stood for 40 years begins to crack, the entire structure feels the tremor. Driver 2, defending the sinking yen. The second force is even more urgent. The Japanese yen has collapsed, losing significant value against the U.S. dollar. And with every drop, Japan faces a brutal reality. Imports get more expensive, especially energy and commodities, the lifeblood of its manufacturing economy. When the yen falls too far, Japan's Ministry of Finance has only one option: intervene. And the most direct way to do that? Sell U.S. Treasuries. Because Japan's foreign reserves, most of which are U.S. dollar assets, become a tool of defense. By selling dollars and buying yen, policymakers try to stop the currency from spiraling. This isn't strategy. This isn't portfolio optimization. This is survival. A structural, mandatory defense of national currency stability. Driver 3, an internal debt crisis demanding liquidity. The third force is the most dangerous of all. Japan is drowning in the highest debt-to-GDP ratio in the developed world. And when a nation reaches that level of debt, liquidity becomes oxygen. You can't function without it. The Japanese government has approved enormous stimulus programs in an attempt to protect its economy from inflation, recession, and industrial decline. But these programs must be funded. And the only scalable source of liquidity left is Japan's massive stockpile of U.S. Treasuries. Selling these assets is no longer optional, it's necessary to keep the domestic system afloat. All three drivers point in the same direction. Japan is withdrawing from its historical role as America's financial backbone. Not because it wants to, but because its own stability is at stake. When Japan steps back, the shock is immediate, and it hits the United States right where it hurts most, in the cost of borrowing. For over 40 years, America enjoyed something extraordinary. A steady stream of foreign capital that allowed it to borrow at unbelievably low rates. Mortgages were cheap. Corporate credit was cheap. Even the US government could pile on debt without feeling the weight. Japan wasn't just a buyer. It was the anchor, the stabilizer holding down yields, keeping the entire structure of US borrowing costs low. But without that anchor, the tide shifts fast. We're already seeing the consequences. Mortgage rates that hovered near 2.6% during the pandemic have surged toward 7%. Credit card interest, auto loans, and business borrowing are hitting levels not seen in decades. For the average American family, the cost of living is rising not just because of inflation, but because money itself is no longer cheap. And this is only the beginning. As Japanese buyers retreat, Washington is forced to rely on private investors who demand higher yields to compensate for risk. When long-term treasuries need to offer more return to attract buyers, everything in the financial system becomes more expensive. For corporations, this means tighter balance sheets. For consumers, it means heavier debt burdens. For the US government, it means soaring interest payments on a national debt that has already spiraled past previous limits. The era of effortless borrowing is ending. An era of painful financing has begun. But the consequences don't stop at America's borders. Because when a global financial pillar like Japan adjusts its position, the shockwaves ripple across the entire world. What makes this moment truly dangerous is not just what happens inside Japan, and not just what happens inside the United States. It's what happens everywhere in between. The global financial system is synchronized, tightly, invisibly, and sometimes frighteningly so. When one major pillar moves, every other pillar feels the pressure. And right now, Japan's retreat is triggering a chain reaction the world cannot ignore. The contagion of rising yields. As Japanese government bond yields surge, investors across the world re-evaluate risk. When a traditionally low-yield market like Japan suddenly becomes profitable, capital shifts. Money moves. Portfolios rebalance. The result? U.S. Treasury yields climb as well, not because America changed its policy, but because Japan's shift alters the entire global equation. A shock in Tokyo becomes a shock in Washington. A tremor in the JGB market becomes volatility in the U.S. bond market. This is financial contagion, structural, rapid, and brutally efficient. The carry trade time bomb. And beneath the surface lies an even more dangerous threat, the unwind of the global yen carry trade. For years, cheap Japanese money fueled everything: emerging markets, real estate, tech stocks, even speculative assets. It was the silent engine powering risk-taking around the world. But when the yen strengthens or yields spike at home, that entire engine stalls. Positions get closed. Money rushes back. Markets that once thrived on cheap liquidity suddenly suffocate. This unwind can happen in days, and when it does, it sends markets spiraling. The geopolitical double shock. Japan and China exit simultaneously. Adding fuel to the fire, Japan isn't the only nation reducing its exposure to U.S. debt. China, the other historic giant in U.S. Treasury holdings, has also been cutting back. But unlike Japan, China's motive is strategic, a long-term shift away from dollar dependence. One ally stepping back is a warning. An ally and a rival stepping back at the same time? That's a structural alarm bell. With both sources of reliable sovereign demand fading, the U.S. Treasury market faces a future where it must stand on its own, without the support of the two nations that once stabilized it. And when the world's biggest debt issuer loses its two biggest external buyers, risk doesn't just rise. It multiplies. A global system entering unstable territory. The message is clear: the old financial order is cracking. Borrowing costs are rising across continents. Volatility is becoming the new normal. And every market, from Europe to Latin America to Southeast Asia, is feeling the strain. We are witnessing not just a shift but a reset. A rebalancing of financial power that will define the next decade. But what does this reset mean for ordinary people, investors, and the global economy? That's where we turn next. What we are witnessing is not a temporary disruption, not a market hiccup, and not a cyclical slowdown. This is the beginning of a new financial chapter. One defined by uncertainty, higher costs, and the unraveling of assumptions that held for more than 40 years. The world grew accustomed to cheap money. Governments borrowed freely. Corporations expanded effortlessly. Consumers financed their lives at historically low interest rates. And through it all, nations like Japan quietly kept the system balanced. But that world is gone. With Japan stepping back, with China reducing its exposure, and with global liquidity tightening, the financial environment we once took for granted is dissolving. The U.S. can no longer rely on a steady flow of foreign capital to suppress borrowing costs. And as interest rates rise, the pressure cascades through every layer of the global economy. For Americans, this means a future where mortgages, car loans, student debt, and credit cards remain expensive, not for months but potentially for years. For investors, it means a world where volatility isn't the exception but the baseline. For governments, it means that every dollar borrowed carries a heavier weight, and every policy mistake becomes more costly. We are transitioning from an era of abundance to an era of constraint. But here's the most important truth. Understanding this shift is the only real protection. Financial literacy, awareness, and preparation become the modern shield against policy failures, market shocks, and structural transitions. Those who adapt early will survive the turbulence. Those who ignore it will feel its full impact. Because the global financial order is resetting, and the consequences will echo far beyond this moment. We're entering a world where money is no longer cheap, where trust in traditional financial anchors is fading, and where nations must confront the cost of decades of easy credit. The storm has already started. The question now is who will navigate it, and who will be swept away. If you want to stay ahead of these transformations, if you want to understand the forces shaping our future rather than being surprised by them, make sure to subscribe to Finance Archives, where we break down the most important shifts in global finance with clarity, depth, and perspective you won't find anywhere else. A new era has begun. Let's learn to navigate it together.